Okay, what we're going to look at here in this presentation is something called a payback period. So what is payback period? It's the time that it takes to get the money back from this initial investment of dollars. Now what we're talking about here is something called capital budgeting. So it's the idea that you invest a certain amount of money up front. Then that investment, that basically comes around and earns you money back. Well, the question with payback period is the analysis where we kind of find out how long that might take. Now, it's a pretty simple concept, and it's one that's used quite a bit. So we want to go over it. Let's look at an example. So let's say that we are investing in a piece of land and some barns, and this idea is this going to be $800,000 is what we're going to invest in this farmer's market property. We looked at a 0 today to 20 years out. Is it worth putting in the $800,000 investment? So what I'm going to do is build a table like we did before with net present value and the other analysis. And that's starting with today. It's a negative of 800,000. Now we could look at this lots of ways with a loan, but we're going with it in this approach. So it's an $800,000 investment today, and it's a question of when do you get the money back? So to do payback period, we usually add a column like residual. So this is kind of taking into account the cash flows that we bring back, how much is left over. So in the first year, if we bring back a $100,000 profit, then that obviously creates a residual in year one of $700,000. Now you go take a look at year two. It's $200,000 gain, let's just say, in our cash flow. And so now we're at $500,000 short. We still have money left. In year three, let's say it goes up to $300,000. Of course, that's going to leave a $200,000 negative there that we still have a residual. And so we go into year four, and let's just assume it's another $300,000 benefit. Well, that's going to leave not money left over anymore. In fact, now our residual has changed. It's $100,000 to the positive. So obviously, when you're looking at time value of money, it's somewhere between this year 3 and 4, in this case, payback period, that we get our money back. So if it was even at year 4, for example, if you only got $200,000, then you would say it takes you all the way up to year 4. But in this case, we didn't really need all of year 4. We had $200,000 we were after, but in year 4, we got $300,000 of profit back. So what is that in terms of a ratio? We didn't need all of year 4. We just needed 0.66, and I'm rounding up 7 of that year, 2/3 of the year. So how do you get payback period? The idea is the first thing you do is look at, well, how long does it take me to get my money back? And the simplest way I can say is, well, it's taken us a full 3 years. Now we're short 200,000 in that third year. So we go to the fourth year and it takes us 0.667 of it. Add that together, that's 3.667 years. So not quite 4, not 3, but 3.667. So nearly 2/3 of that fourth year. So 3.2/3 of a year. So this idea of payback period is a simple idea of how much time does it take to get your initial investment back. Now, when we're talking about this or we're thinking about it, there is this concept now of, well, what would you do with this? Why is it good to calculate? People calculate it because it's the concept of how long is it going to take me to get my money back. So that's the whole focus of payback period. So now let's talk about this idea of use. In other words, how much or how do we use this information? So there's a couple of ways to look at it. Let's just start with the number one thing, and that's, like I just mentioned a while ago, that's to compare time. So you may have two investments. So we could think of it right now as like you got an A alternative and a B alternative. And so how much time does it take to get back each one? And maybe that's a good way to justify it. However, there's a negative. And the negative is, the negative is it does not account for something very important, and that's risk. So time value of money is about time and risk. And with payback period, you're really only looking at just time. So it's kind of a negative of it. It's still used though. And the idea is it's pretty simple. If you've got two options, as I mentioned before, you got option A and option B. The idea of option A has a payback period, let's say, of a simple 3.67 years like we had. And option B has a payback period, another investment of 5.2 years to get that back. So really option A looks like the best one to go with, of course. It ends up getting our money back faster. But the risk factor between these two is just unknown. So that's kind of the negative of payback period. Now, if these two things were equal to each other, then that's a simpler concept. And the idea, if they're equal to each other, then option A, of course, would be where we would go. But it really does depend on the concept of the risk, and payback period doesn't account for it. If the risk is the same, then payback period is just an example of what you could do in capital budgeting. But the key factor is risk. Risk is something we really want to make sure we understand, and that's kind of a negative to payback period. So again, it just depends on how you use the concept.